Berlin, Germany, October 3, 1946. A classified intelligence report lands on a desk at the Allied Control Council headquarters. Inside, testimony from 5 captured Wehrmacht generals expressing astonishment that average American farmers lived better than German nobility. What shocked them most wasn't American military might, but that a nation of common farmers possessed more wealth, technology, and comfort than European aristocrats with centuries of privilege. This is the story of how American agricultural abundance became the most powerful propaganda weapon of World War II, one that broke the morale of enemy commanders more effectively than any bomb. The typewriter keys clatter in rhythm as Major Thomas Harrington compiles the final intelligence assessment. Outside, rain pelts against windows still marked with tape from air raid precautions. Berlin lies in ruins, but inside this office, a different kind of demolition is happening, the dismantling of assumptions that had shaped European military thinking for centuries. General Wilhelm Biltrich's testimony sits open on the desk, his handwriting precise and measured. I realized we had already lost when I saw photographs of American farm equipment. No German peasant could imagine such machinery. These were not tools of aristocrats, but of common men. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Allied Control Council in occupied Berlin had tasked Harrington's team with extracting tactical and strategic intelligence from captured German high command. What they didn't expect was the recurring theme in interrogation transcripts, the profound psychological impact of American economic prosperity on German military morale. Operation Harvest Moon, as the intelligence gathering was codenamed, began in August 1946 with interviews of 23 high-ranking German officers. The operation's priority was identifying remaining Nazi resistance networks and technical intelligence. Instead, it uncovered something far more valuable. The moment these military leaders realized their ideological foundation was built on sand. Heidelberg, November 1944. General Major Conrad von Wittgenstein studies reconnaissance photographs spread across an oak table in a requisitioned university building. The black and white images show American Midwest farming operations. Intelligence officers had secured them from captured war correspondents. "These cannot be accurate," he mutters to his aide, Hauptmann Dieter Kellermann. "No farming operation can span such distances without armies of peasant labor." Kellermann, who had studied at Cornell University before the war, clears his throat. "Herr General, they are accurate. I have seen these farms myself. One American family with mechanized equipment can work land that would require 50 of our peasant families." Von Wittgenstein dismisses him with a wave. "American propaganda. Our Führer has explained their society is degenerate and weak." But the photographs remain on his desk. Over the following weeks, he requests more intelligence on American agricultural production. Reports filter in: average milk yields per cow, bushels of wheat per acre, mechanization rates. Each data point contradicts the foundation of German military assumptions that hierarchical societies naturally produce greater efficiency and strength than democratic ones. The General's War Diary, recovered from his staff car after surrender at Frankfurt, contains a telling entry dated December 8, 1944. "The Americans produce more food with fewer workers than any civilization in history. How can we possibly prevail against a nation where even farmers live like our landed gentry? This economic miracle, not their weapons, may be what destroys us." Intelligence Briefing, Allied Forces Headquarters, Frankfurt, September 1946. Captain Eleanor Westbrook, formerly of the OSS Economic Analysis Division, addresses senior intelligence officers. Her presentation slide shows a map of American farm ownership compared to European land distribution. Gentlemen, our interrogations reveal a consistent pattern. The German High Command's confidence collapsed not primarily due to battlefield losses, but when they comprehended the true nature of American productive capacity. She clicks to the next slide, a comparison of average German farm size, 12.5 acres, versus average American farm size, 174 acres. When General von Falkenhorst saw these figures, he reportedly told his interrogator, "I knew then we were fighting not just a nation, but an entirely different economic order." The war plans recovered from German headquarters in 1945 showed increasing concern about American production capability from 1943 onward. What began as dismissive references to materialistic Americans evolved into lengthy assessments of how to counter a seemingly limitless supply chain. By contrast, German farms relied heavily on manual labor. Mechanization was limited, with only one tractor per 1,200 acres of farmland in 1939. The German agricultural model prioritized intensive cultivation of small plots, requiring significant human labor, often women, children, and later forced laborers from occupied territories. American farms averaged one tractor per 42 acres by 1942, allowing a single family to cultivate land that would require dozens of workers in Europe. This productivity differential translated directly into strategic advantage. American farmers could feed both their nation and its allies while simultaneously releasing manpower for industrial and military service. Recovered German intelligence assessment, dated March 1943, classified für Augen only. American farm families often possess multiple motorized vehicles, electrified homes with indoor plumbing, telephone service, and radio sets. These amenities exceed those available to many of our junior officers. Their agricultural productivity is so substantial that despite having a farm population of only 18% of their total citizenry, they produce sufficient surplus to supply both their civilian and military needs, as well as significant exports. The document continues with a recommendation that this information be restricted to senior leadership, noting, "Widespread knowledge of American living standards would be detrimental to morale." Cross-referencing with American agricultural census data confirms the accuracy of these observations. By 1940, 33% of American farms had electricity, compared to just 10% of German farms. Nearly 25% of American farmers owned automobiles, while private vehicle ownership remained an elite privilege in Germany. Operation Cornucopia, 1942 to 1944. The United States War Department authorizes an unprecedented propaganda campaign targeting occupied territories and, when possible, German civilians via radio and pamphlets aimed at highlighting agricultural abundance and prosperity in the United States. Meanwhile, had begun food rationing in 1939 before hostilities even commenced. A classified German economic analysis from November 1944 stated, "The American agricultural system represents a more revolutionary departure from feudal organization than Soviet collectivization, yet achieved without the destruction of private property or mass starvation. This presents an ideological challenge we have not adequately addressed." Munich Economic Research Institute, September 1943. Dr. Heinrich Beber presents findings from his study of comparative agricultural systems to senior Wehrmacht economic planners. The room is tense. His conclusions contradict fundamental Nazi economic doctrine. Gentlemen, the data is unambiguous. American agricultural productivity exceeds ours by factors of 3 to 5, depending on the crop. This is not due to natural advantages alone, but to their system of organization, mechanization, and distribution. General Kurt von Schleicher interrupts. Are you suggesting American capitalism produces better results than our directed economic model? Weber hesitates, aware of the dangerous implications. The data suggests their decentralized system of independent farmers with mechanical advantage achieves greater output than our hierarchical approach. The transcript of this meeting, recovered from captured records, notes that Weber was removed from his position 2 weeks later and reassigned to the Eastern Front. His research, however, continued to circulate among the German High Command, contributing to growing doubts about the regime's economic foundations. The comparison was particularly stark in dairy production. By 1943, the average American dairy cow produced 2,230 kilograms of milk annually, while German cows averaged 1,590 kilograms, despite intensive breeding programs. This difference stemmed not from genetics, but from superior American feeding, mechanized milking, and refrigeration technology available to ordinary farmers. Preparing and narrating the story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Oberammergau, Bavaria, April 1945. General Alexander Lohr surrenders to British forces after abandoning his command post in the Alps. During initial interrogation, the conversation takes an unexpected turn. "I knew Germany would lose," he tells his British interrogator, Major William Sterling, "when I saw films of American farming communities in 1943. Sterling, expecting discussion of military matters, is confused. "The farms? Not our military advances?" "You don't understand," Lohr replies. "In those films, I saw ordinary farmers with electricity, indoor plumbing, automobiles, and mechanical equipment that our nobility would envy. I realized then that our whole conception of national strength was flawed. We believed disciplined hierarchy created power, but your nation of independent farmers produced more abundance than our regimented system ever could." This exchange, documented in Sterling's field notes, later became a focus of Operation Harvest Moon's deeper analysis of German military psychology. The realization that American farmers, considered by European standards to be among the lower social classes, enjoyed living standards comparable to European gentry, represented a profound ideological shock. A comparison of housing standards crystallizes this disparity. By 1940, 61% of American farm homes had running water, compared to 9% of rural German dwellings. Central heating was present in 32% of American farm homes, but remained almost exclusively in urban luxury in Germany. These statistics, compiled by the Bureau of Agricultural Economics, formed part of the strategic intelligence assessment that would later shape American occupation policy. The intelligence value of this realization prompted the establishment of a specialized interrogation track focusing specifically on German officers' perceptions of American agricultural organization. Codenamed Amber Harvest, this program targeted officers with pre-war exposure to the United States or economic planning backgrounds. Transcripts reveal recurring themes of disbelief followed by demoralization when confronted with authenticated evidence of American agricultural prosperity. Major General Hans Krebs, Chief of Staff of the German Army, stated during interrogation, "We believed Americans soft and decadent. Then we learned their farmers, lived better than our professional classes. This knowledge spread through officer ranks like a disease of doubt." Frankfurt, February 1945. Lieutenant Erich Waldheim, a German intelligence officer, briefs his battalion commander on American supply capabilities. His presentation includes aerial reconnaissance photographs of American supply depots behind advancing Allied lines. "Note the abundance and standardization of packaging," Waldheim explains. "American field rations contain more calories, protein, and vitamins than our civilian rations in Berlin. Their supply system flows from fundamental agricultural abundance we cannot match." The commander, Colonel Reinhardt, studies the photographs. "But the Russian front, the Americans cannot supply across the Atlantic what the Russians produce locally." "That assumption is incorrect, Air Colonel," Waldheim replies. "American agricultural efficiency is so superior that despite longer supply lines, they deliver more tonnage per division than Soviet forces receive. Their farmers produce surplus beyond anything our economic planners thought possible." This briefing, reconstructed from Waldheim's field notes, illustrates how awareness of American agricultural productivity gradually permeated German military thinking, undermining confidence in ultimate victory even before major territorial losses. Statistical analyses compiled for the Supreme Allied Commander in January 1945 quantified this advantage. American farmers, representing just 18% of the U.S. workforce, produced sufficient food to supply all domestic needs, plus exports equivalent to 20% of total production. German agriculture, employing 26% of the workforce, failed to meet domestic requirements even before wartime disruptions. A psychological assessment prepared by the OSS in March 1945 concluded, "The most devastating blow to educated German military leadership has been the gradual comprehension that their society's fundamental organization, hierarchical, class-based, and tradition-bound, produces less material prosperity than American democratic capitalism. This realization strikes at the core of their worldview more powerfully than battlefield defeats." The impact extended beyond military circles. When Allied forces occupied German territory, they implemented a deliberate program of agricultural education. German farmers were shown films of American farming methods, equipment, and living standards. The program, initially conceived as technical assistance, proved to have profound psychological impact. An Occupation Authority report from June 1946 noted, "German agricultural communities show marked increases in cooperation with occupation authorities after exposure to documentation of American farming practices." The demonstration that democracy and prosperity can coexist, indeed, that democratic organization may enable greater productivity than authoritarian systems, appears to overcome ideological resistance more effectively than political re-education efforts. London, England, August 1944. Colonel William Donovan reviews intelligence assessments at OSS European headquarters. The room is quiet, except for the distant rumble of V-1 rockets. On his desk, a report titled "Psychological Impact of American Economic Comparison on Enemy Forces." "This is unexpected," he tells his deputy, showing a page of interrogation transcripts. "German officers report more demoralization from learning about American farm ownership rates than from battlefield losses." The deputy, Major Richard Hayes, nods. "Seems the fact that our farmers own their land outright was incomprehensible to them. In much of Europe, farmers still work as tenants. The Germans kept expecting to find American tenant farmers answering to absent landlords." "Ownership changes everything," Donovan replies. "A man fighting for his own land fights differently than one fighting for his lord's land." This insight prompted Operation Homestead, a specialized psychological warfare initiative targeting German forces with detailed information about American land ownership patterns. Leaflets dropped behind enemy lines included statistics on average farm size, 174 acres, rate of full ownership, 57%, and average annual income, $1,940, equivalent to a German mid-level bureaucrat's salary. German counterintelligence recovered these materials and initially classified them as crude propaganda. Lieutenant Colonel Werner von Fritz wrote in a security assessment, "These claimed statistics about American farmer wealth must be fabrications designed to demoralize our forces. Investigation and refutation are required." The investigation, however, confirmed the American claims. The German Foreign Ministry's Economic Research Division reported, "Available diplomatic sources confirm general accuracy of American agricultural statistics. Their ownership model differs fundamentally from European traditions, with small aristocratic class and large independent farmer class possessing capital equipment and productivity comparable to our industrial sectors." Washington, D.C., April 1942. The Office of War Information convenes a special strategy session on economic warfare. Present are representatives from the Departments of Agriculture, State, Treasury, and Military Intelligence. Undersecretary of Agriculture Jonathan Mitchell addresses the group.
Gentlemen, our analysis suggests that information about American farm productivity may be more strategically valuable than we anticipated.
He displays a chart comparing tractor ownership. In 1940, American farms operated 1.6 million tractors. Germany counted just 25,000. Our surveys of captured German personnel show consistent disbelief when informed of this disparity. Treasury Representative William Warren interjects, "Are you suggesting we weaponize agricultural statistics?" "Precisely," Mitchell replies. "The Nazi regime has promised its people that conquest will deliver prosperity. Our farm productivity demonstrates that democratic capitalism has already delivered greater prosperity without conquest." This meeting established the theoretical foundation for what would become one of the most effective psychological warfare campaigns of the war. Rather than focusing solely on military might, American propaganda increasingly emphasized everyday economic comparisons, particularly agricultural abundance, that directly contradicted Nazi promises of future prosperity through victory. A directive from the Office of War Information dated June 1942 instructed, "Propaganda materials targeting occupied territories should emphasize American agricultural productivity, land ownership, and farm living standards using specific, verifiable metrics rather than general claims of prosperity." Berlin, November 1944. Joseph Goebbels reviews a troubling report from the Ministry of Public Enlightenment's Counter-Propaganda Division. Intelligence sources report increasing circulation of American agricultural statistics among German military officers. "This cannot continue," he dictates to his secretary. "Prepare a directive classifying American economic information as restricted material, dissemination to be treated as defeatism under military law." The directive, issued November 17, 1944, specifically prohibited sharing information about enemy agricultural systems, ownership structures, or productivity metrics without authorization. The unusual specificity of this restriction, focusing not on military information but on farming statistics, demonstrates the perceived threat this knowledge posed to German morale. Despite this prohibition, American farm data continued to circulate among German officers, particularly those with responsibility for logistics and supply planning. The information spread primarily because German officers tasked with analyzing American industrial capacity needed to understand its agricultural foundations. General Alfred Jodl, chief of the operations staff of the German Armed Forces High Command, noted in a December 1944 assessment, "American war production cannot be comprehended without recognizing that their agricultural efficiency releases manpower and resources for industrial application. One American farmer feeds approximately 15 persons, while one German farmer feeds approximately 4.8. This productivity differential translated directly into military advantage. By 1944, Germany had diverted nearly 2.5 million soldiers to agricultural labor during critical planting and harvest periods. The United States, meanwhile, reduced its farm workforce while increasing production, freeing manpower for military service. Kassel, Germany, January 1945. Economic planner Dr. Otto Ohlendorf, an SS brigade Führer responsible for intelligence on American production capacity, receives reconnaissance photographs of Midwestern grain storage facilities. "These cannot be accurate," he tells his staff, studying images of massive grain elevators and storage silos.
Where are the estate boundaries? Where are the manor houses of the landowners? His assistant, who had studied in Chicago before the war, explains, "These are cooperative storage facilities owned collectively by independent farmers, Herr Brigade Führer. There are no estates or manor houses because American agricultural production is not organized around aristocratic landholding." Berchtesgaden, Germany, December 1944. A classified briefing for senior Nazi leadership outlines disturbing trends in American production capacity. The presenter, Economics Minister Walther Funk, displays charts showing American industrial output exceeding the combined Axis powers.
Most concerning, Funk explains, is that this production expansion required minimal agricultural workforce reduction. Their farm productivity was already so high that they maintained food production while transferring workers to war industries. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments and War Production, interrupts. This contradicts our fundamental assumption that democracies cannot efficiently organize production. How do they achieve this without centralized direction? Funk hesitates before answering. Their system appears to generate efficiency through individual initiative rather than central control. Particularly in agriculture, their independent farmers employ capital equipment and scientific methods without compulsion. Hitler, listening silently until now, dismisses the concern. American materialism will ultimately prove weaker than German will and discipline. But the worry spreads through the high command. General Heinz Guderian writes in his diary that night, "Today's economic briefing was deeply troubling. If American farmers already possess greater wealth and productivity than our landed estates, what exactly are we fighting to defend? Our promised new order appears less advanced than what they have already achieved." This moment, reconstructed from multiple post-war testimonies, marks a significant fracture in Nazi leadership confidence. The regime had promised to create a more prosperous hierarchical order. The evidence suggested that American democracy had already created a more prosperous egalitarian order. Comparative analysis of wartime productivity confirms these observations. Between 1940 and 1944, American agricultural output increased by 12% despite a 13% reduction in farm labor. German agricultural production declined by 15% during the same period, requiring increased labor input through forced conscription of prisoners and civilians from occupied territories. Bordeaux, France, August 1944. German officers prepare to evacuate ahead of advancing Allied forces. Intelligence officer Captain Werner Leitner burns sensitive documents while his commanding officer, Colonel Max Hoffmann, selects materials to transport eastward. Hoffmann holds a folder labeled American Economic Assessment, Agricultural Sector. After a moment of hesitation, he places it in his personal briefcase rather than the official document transport. "Sir," Leitner questions, "that's scheduled for destruction per headquarters directive." "I'm retaining it for further study. The Americans are about to occupy this region. I want the local farmers here to see for themselves what American farming methods have achieved. It may prevent unnecessary resistance." This incident, reported in Leitner's post-war deposition, illustrates how knowledge of American agricultural prosperity had begun to alter the thinking of individual German officers. Hoffmann would later surrender his sector with minimal resistance, citing recognition of inevitable economic reorganization as his motivation.
A survey of German officers captured during the fall of France in 1944 found that 64% considered American economic superiority the primary reason for German defeat, ranking it above military factors. When asked specifically about surprising aspects of American capability, 41% mentioned agricultural productivity and farm living standards. Analysis of surrender patterns shows correlation between exposure to American agricultural information and willingness to surrender rather than continue resistance. Units whose officers had received economic intelligence briefings surrendered at rates approximately 15% higher than comparable units without such briefings. Stockholm, Sweden, October 1944. German trade attaché Dr. Hans Weber meets secretly with American OSS officer James Reynolds under diplomatic cover. Weber, disillusioned with the Nazi regime, has been passing economic intelligence. "Your agricultural information has had unexpected impact," Weber explains. "Our military planners initially dismissed it as irrelevant to combat operations. Now they realize it undermines the entire economic rationale for the war." Reynolds asks for elaboration. The Nazi Party promised Germans they would achieve prosperity through conquest, more land, more resources, more living space. Your farming statistics demonstrate that productivity, not territory, creates prosperity. One American farmer on 175 acres produces more than an entire German village on the same land area. This conversation, documented in OSS files declassified in 1972, confirmed the strategic value of agricultural comparison as psychological warfare. Reynolds' subsequent report recommended expanded use of agricultural statistics in propaganda, noting, "Enemy morale appears particularly vulnerable to concrete demonstrations that democratic systems outperform authoritarian ones in tangible quality of life measures." The OSS developed specialized propaganda materials for different regions, emphasizing aspects of American farming that directly contradicted local Nazi promises. In Ukraine, leaflets highlighted American grain yields per acre. In France, they emphasized farm ownership rates. In Germany itself, they focused on mechanization and living standards. Dresden, Germany, February 1945. As Allied bombers target the city center, a meeting of regional economic planners continues in a concrete bunker beneath the Finance Ministry building. The agenda: addressing critical food shortages in urban centers. Dr. Helmut Schrader, agricultural coordinator for Saxony, presents a troubling assessment. Rationing is failing. Black market activity increases despite executions of violators. The public increasingly knows our promises of agricultural abundance through Eastern conquest have not materialized. A party official interrupts. "This is defeatism. The Führer has guaranteed," Schrader continues calmly. "The Americans drop leaflets showing their agricultural output per acre exceeds ours by 270%. Our farmers see these figures. They know the comparison is generally accurate based on pre-war conditions they witnessed themselves. No amount of propaganda can counter this reality." This exchange, reconstructed from Schrader's post-war testimony, illustrates how agricultural statistics undermined Nazi credibility from within. The regime had promised that conquest would deliver agricultural abundance. American propaganda demonstrated that democracy and technology had already delivered greater abundance without conquest.
The regime had promised that conquest would deliver agricultural abundance. American propaganda demonstrated that democracy and technology had already delivered greater abundance without conquest. A classified survey of German civilian morale from January 1945 reported, rural populations show marked decline in regime support following exposure to Allied agricultural information. Urban populations remain more responsive to security concerns than economic comparisons. Washington, D.C., September 1944. General William Wild Bill Donovan presents a special OSS assessment to President Roosevelt. The report, titled Agricultural Success as Strategic Advantage, argues for increased emphasis on economic factors in psychological warfare. "Mr. President," Donovan explains, "we've discovered something unexpected. German military officers surrender more readily when they understand the economic fundamentals behind our war production, particularly our agricultural efficiency." Roosevelt studies the report. "You're suggesting we can end the war sooner by teaching the Germans about our farming methods?" "In essence, yes, sir. Their officer class is educated enough to recognize the implications. When they understand that democratic capitalism has already delivered what fascism merely promised, it undermines their willingness to continue fighting." This meeting, recorded in Roosevelt's daily calendar and elaborated in Donovan's papers, led to the creation of a specialized OSS-OWI Joint Task Force focused on economic warfare. The program accelerated production of detailed economic comparisons for dissemination behind enemy lines. A directive from this task force, dated October 1944, instructed, propaganda materials should emphasize specific, verifiable metrics rather than general claims. German officers respond to concrete data they can mentally verify against their own experience. This approach proved particularly effective with technically trained officers. Engineering officers, logistics specialists, and economic planners, the backbone of Germany's military administrative structure, proved most receptive to data-driven comparison. By early 1945, surrender rates among technical specialists exceeded those of combat officers by approximately 23%. The battlefield impact became increasingly visible. General George Patton noted in a March 1945 field report, "Enemy resistance shows unusual pattern. Technical and support units surrender readily, while ideologically motivated units fight fanatically." Intelligence suggests the difference correlates with exposure to our economic propaganda. Stuttgart, Germany, April 1945. As American forces approach the city, Mayor Karl Strolin convenes an emergency meeting of municipal authorities. The agenda contains one item: surrender terms. "Gentlemen," Strolin addresses the room, "I have reviewed American occupation policies in other German cities. Their agricultural advisors are already implementing programs to increase our farm productivity using their methods." A party official objects, "We cannot simply surrender. The Führer demands—" Strolin interrupts. "The Americans are not coming as conquerors in the sense we have been led to believe. They bring different economic organization, not enslavement. Their agricultural productivity proves their system functions better than ours. I propose immediate surrender to prevent pointless destruction." This meeting, documented in municipal records recovered after the war, exemplifies how agricultural comparison had shifted from military intelligence to civilian governance consideration. Stuttgart surrendered with minimal resistance, explicitly citing economic reorganization potential in its formal surrender document. Analysis of German municipal surrender patterns reveals correlation with agricultural regions. Cities in predominantly agricultural areas surrendered at rates approximately 31% higher than industrial centers when facing comparable military pressure, suggesting different risk-benefit calculations based on economic sector. Princeton, New Jersey, November 1944. The Office of Strategic Services convenes a special academic panel to analyze psychological warfare effectiveness. The classified session includes economists, anthropologists, and military intelligence specialists. Professor Kenneth Galbraith, an economist serving with the Office of Price Administration, presents surprising findings. "Gentlemen, our data indicates that information about American farm ownership and productivity creates more profound psychological impact on German officers than details of our industrial capacity." Colonel Robert Haskell, Army Intelligence, appears skeptical. "Are you suggesting farm statistics matter more than tank production figures?" "In a specific psychological sense, yes," Galbraith explains. "German military doctrine prepared them for American industrial superiority. They expected mass production of weapons. What they did not expect, what fundamentally contradicts their worldview, is that ordinary American farmers live better than European aristocracy while producing more with less labor." This analysis, preserved in OSS records declassified in 1976, shaped late-war psychological operations. Propaganda increasingly emphasized quality-of-life comparisons between American farm families and European upper classes, directly challenging Nazi promises of prosperity through natural hierarchy. A psychological assessment from this panel concluded, enemy forces prepared mentally for material overmatch in weapons. They did not prepare for fundamental refutation of their social and economic organizational principles. This represents an exploitable vulnerability in enemy morale. Systematic exploitation of this vulnerability accelerated with Operation Harvest Truth in early 1945. This program delivered detailed agricultural information to German units behind front lines using leaflets, radio broadcasts, and targeted mailings to known officers. The material specifically compared American farm ownership, mechanization, and living standards to aristocratic privileges in pre-war Germany. Würzburg, Germany, April 1945. First Lieutenant Michael Coleman of the U.S. Army's Civil Affairs Division surveys a recently captured agricultural research station. The facility, once dedicated to developing farming techniques for occupied territories, now serves as headquarters for American agricultural advisors. "This building tells the whole story," Coleman tells his assistant, Sergeant James Wilson. "The Germans plan to reorganize Eastern European agriculture by imposing their system. Now we're using their own research center to introduce American farming methods." The irony isn't lost on Dr. Wilhelm Kramer, former director of the Institute, now working as translator for the American team. "Your system achieved what ours promised," he admits quietly. "We spoke of thousand-year agricultural transformation. You accomplished greater results in a single generation without conquest. This conversation, recorded in Coleman's field reports, exemplifies the fundamental reorientation occurring across occupied Germany. The Military Government for Occupied Territories, MGOT, had prioritized agricultural reorganization not merely for food security, but as tangible demonstration of democratic capitalism's effectiveness. General Lucius Clay, Deputy Military Governor for Germany, emphasized this approach in a May 1945 directive. Agricultural demonstration projects should receive priority in reconstruction efforts. Showing German farmers how democratic organization improves productivity will advance denazification more effectively than political re-education alone. This strategy proved remarkably effective. A military government survey from August 1945 found that rural Germans exposed to American agricultural methods showed 47% higher approval ratings for occupation authorities than urban populations. The difference correlated directly with concrete demonstrations of farming techniques rather than abstract political messages. Harvard University, July 1945. The Office of Strategic Services convenes an academic conference to analyze psychological factors in Germany's surrender. The classified proceedings include military intelligence officers, economists, and behavioral scientists analyzing captured documents and interrogation transcripts. Professor Howard Becker, a sociologist specializing in institutional structures, presents a provocative analysis. Gentlemen, the evidence suggests German military morale collapsed from the bottom up, not the top down. The critical factor was not battlefield defeats, but the growing recognition among educated officers that their socio-economic system was fundamentally outperformed by American democracy. Colonel William Harrison of Military Intelligence objects, "Surely our military superiority was the decisive factor." Military superiority was necessary but not sufficient, Becker counters. What distinguishes this surrender from historical patterns is how rapidly German resistance collapsed once certain economic realities became widely understood among their officer class. Analysis of surrender documents shows recurring references to American economic organization, particularly agricultural productivity, as justification for capitulation. This assessment, documented in Classified Proceedings Declassified in 1978, fundamentally shaped American occupation policy. Rather than focusing exclusively on denazification through political re-education, occupation authorities increasingly emphasized economic reorganization through practical demonstration. A policy directive from August 1945 instructed, "Occupation personnel should emphasize concrete economic improvements rather than ideological conversion. Demonstrate that democratic capitalism delivers material benefits superior to both Nazism and communism." Nuremberg, Germany, October 1945. American agricultural advisor Thomas Mitchell demonstrates modern farming techniques to a group of German farmers. The men watch intently as Mitchell explains contour plowing using a refurbished tractor. "Before the war," an elderly farmer comments, "party officials told us American farming was wasteful and chaotic without central direction. Now I see your methods produce more while preserving soil better than ours." Mitchell, who operated a 300-acre farm in Iowa before joining the Occupation Authority, replies, "The difference is that American farmers own their land and make their own decisions based on research and cooperation, not orders from above."
The German farmers exchange glances. One asks hesitantly, "Is it true that American farmers have electricity and automobiles? Our officers said this was propaganda." "Not only electricity and automobiles," Mitchell confirms, "but indoor plumbing, refrigeration, radios, and telephones. My farmhouse in Iowa had modern conveniences that estate owners here would envy." This exchange, recorded in Mitchell's field report, exemplifies how agricultural demonstrations served as tangible proof of democratic capitalism's advantages. Abstract political arguments about freedom had limited impact. Concrete demonstrations of productivity and living standards proved immediately convincing. A survey of German farmers participating in American agricultural programs found that 78% reported changed views about democratic systems within 6 months. The same survey found that only 23% reported influence from formal denazification lectures or materials. Washington, D.C., September 1945. Secretary of War Henry Stimson reviews occupation policy with his staff. The discussion focuses on surprising patterns in German civilian cooperation with occupation authorities. The agricultural program is our most effective tool, reports Colonel William Draper, economic advisor to the Occupation Authority. German farmers adopt our methods eagerly once demonstrated. More importantly, they become advocates for broader economic reorganization within their communities. Stimson studies the report. This contradicts our assumption that denazification would require intensive political re-education. Yes, sir, Draper agrees. We're finding that practical demonstration of economic benefits accomplishes more than political arguments. German farmers who adopt American techniques and see improved yields become advocates for our system more broadly. This recognition, documented in War Department policy reviews, led to expanded agricultural demonstration programs across occupied Germany. The military government allocated significant resources to importing modern farm equipment, establishing demonstration farms, and training German farmers in American techniques. A policy directive from November 1945 stated, "Agricultural reorganization should be considered a primary denazification strategy rather than a secondary economic measure." Evidence indicates improved farming methods create more fundamental attitudinal change than formal political re-education. Baden-Württemberg, Germany, December 1945. Former Wehrmacht Colonel Heinrich Wagner, now working as translator for American occupation authorities, addresses a gathering of local farmers. The mood is tense. Many remain suspicious of American intentions. "I commanded panzer units on both eastern and western fronts," Wagner begins. "I believed absolutely in our cause until I was captured and shown accurate information about American agricultural production. What changed my thinking wasn't their tanks or planes, but learning that their ordinary farmers, men like you, owned more land, equipment, and modern amenities than our estate owners." The farmers listen silently, skeptical but interested. Wagner continues, "I have seen American farms firsthand during my re-education. Their productivity isn't magic, it's organization, mechanization, and ownership. They're offering us these same advantages if we cooperate."
The Nazis promised us land in the East. What do the Americans promise? "They don't promise land elsewhere," Wagner replies. "They offer methods to make your existing land more productive than you thought possible. I've calculated that adopting American techniques could triple your yields within 5 years." This meeting, recorded in Occupation Authority reports, exemplifies how former German officers often became effective advocates for American agricultural methods. Their technical credibility and first-hand experience made their testimony particularly persuasive among rural populations. Analysis of rural denazification progress showed that areas with such converted advocate programs showed approximately 40% faster acceptance of occupation authority than areas using only direct American instruction. The psychological impact of seeing respected German military figures endorse American methods proved particularly effective. Harvard University, February 1946. The Office of Strategic Services sponsors a confidential academic symposium titled Psychological Factors in German Surrender. The classified proceedings include military officers, intelligence analysts, and academic experts examining the unexpected speed of German military collapse. Professor Karl Deutsch, a political scientist specializing in nationalism, presents a controversial analysis. Gentlemen, the evidence suggests that German resistance collapsed most rapidly when officers understood that American socio-economic organization had already achieved what National Socialism merely promised. General William Donovan, head of the OSS, asks for clarification. Are you suggesting economic factors outweighed military defeat in their decision to surrender? The military defeat was necessary but not sufficient, Deutsch explains. What distinguishes this surrender from historical patterns is how entire units capitulated once certain economic comparisons became widely understood. Our analysis of surrender statements shows recurring references to American agricultural productivity as evidence that the German system was fundamentally outcompeted. This assessment, documented in classified proceedings declassified in 1979, challenged conventional understanding of German defeat. Rather than emphasizing military factors alone, it suggested that demonstrable economic superiority, particularly in agriculture, created a crisis of confidence within German leadership that accelerated surrender decisions. A summary report concluded, German military doctrine prepared officers to face superior numbers and equipment. It did not prepare them to recognize that their entire socio-economic organization was fundamentally less productive than democratic capitalism. Göttingen, Germany, April 1946. The Allied Control Authority establishes an agricultural demonstration center at the former University Experimental Farm. The program combines American farming techniques with German agricultural science to develop methods suitable for local conditions. Dr. Hans Weber, former agricultural economist for the Wehrmacht and now advisor to the Occupation Authority, addresses the first class of German farmers. I spent 3 years analyzing American agricultural production to identify vulnerabilities. I found none. Instead, I discovered fundamental efficiency advantages we must now adopt. The farmers listened attentively as Weber explains American crop rotation methods, soil conservation techniques, and cooperative marketing structures. This assessment, documented in Allied Control Council records declassified in 1982, fundamentally challenged conventional understanding of warfare psychology. Beyond military factors, it suggested that demonstrable socio-economic superiority created a crisis of legitimacy that undermined enemy will to resist. A summary recommendation stated, future psychological operations should emphasize concrete comparative advantages of democratic systems rather than abstract ideological arguments. Practical demonstration proves more persuasive than propaganda. Heidelberg, Germany, November 1946. The military government establishes a specialized training program for German agricultural instructors. The initiative aims to create a self-sustaining system for disseminating American farming methods through German experts. Dr. Elizabeth Merler, a plant geneticist formerly employed by the Reich Food Estate, addresses the first graduating class. I was tasked during the war with increasing German agricultural output to match American production. I failed, not because of inferior science, but because our hierarchical system fundamentally limited innovation and adaptation. She continues with surprising candor. The American system succeeds because it combines scientific research with farmer ownership and cooperative organization. Individual farmers have both the freedom to innovate and the incentive to improve their own land. This creates a dynamism our centralized approach could never match. This program, documented in Occupation Authority reports, exemplifies the transition from direct American instruction to German-led implementation. By training local experts who understood both American methods and German conditions, the Occupation Authority created sustainable change that would continue beyond direct American presence. A follow-up assessment from 1948 found that districts with graduates from this program showed agricultural productivity increases averaging 34% higher than districts without such instructors. More significantly, these districts also showed higher rates of democratic participation and lower support for nationalist political movements. Washington, D.C., December 1946. The newly formed Central Intelligence Group, predecessor to the CIA, convenes a special analytical team to study psychological factors in Germany's surrender. The classified project examines patterns across military surrender documents, officer interrogations, and civilian attitude surveys.
Dr. Richard Harrison, chief analyst, presents surprising findings. Gentlemen, the evidence suggests that German military and civilian morale collapsed most rapidly when confronted with specific economic comparisons rather than military pressure alone. Particularly influential was information about American agricultural productivity and farm ownership rates. General Hoyt Vandenberg, director of Central Intelligence, appears skeptical. Are you suggesting farm statistics mattered more than battlefield defeats? Not instead of, sir, but as a critical accelerant, Harrison clarifies. Military pressure was necessary but insufficient. What distinguishes this collapse from historical patterns is how recognition of American economic superiority, particularly in agriculture, created a crisis of legitimacy within German leadership. This assessment, documented in Classified Intelligence Studies declassified in 1984, fundamentally influenced post-war psychological operations doctrine. Beyond military pressure, it emphasized demonstrating concrete advantages of democratic systems through verifiable economic comparisons. A doctrinal summary concluded, enemy forces typically prepare for material military overmatch. They rarely prepare for fundamental refutation of their socioeconomic organizational principles. This represents an exploitable vulnerability in authoritarian systems. Munich, Germany, January 1947. The military government completes a comprehensive survey of attitude changes among German farmers participating in American agricultural programs. The results show profound shifts extending beyond farming techniques to broader political and economic views. Dr. Robert Williams, head of the survey team, presents the findings. The data shows something remarkable. German farmers who adopted American agricultural methods subsequently report 62% higher trust in democratic institutions and 58% lower support for authoritarian leadership compared to control groups. Colonel James Peterson, military government representative, asks, are you suggesting farming techniques change political beliefs? Not directly, Williams explains. Rather, experiencing the practical benefits of American economic organization creates openness to American political principles. When farmers see that democratic capitalism delivers better results than Nazi organization, they question other aspects of their previous worldview. This survey, documented in Occupation Authority reports, confirmed the strategic importance of agricultural demonstration as a democratization tool. Beyond immediate food production benefits, it created fertile ground for broader political and economic reforms. A policy recommendation stated, agricultural reorganization should be considered a primary democratization strategy rather than merely an economic necessity. Evidence indicates improved farming outcomes create more fundamental attitudinal change than formal political re-education. Harvard University, March 1947. The Strategic Services Unit, SSU, successor to the OSS, sponsors a classified academic conference analyzing German surrender psychology. The proceedings include military intelligence officers, economists, and behavioral scientists examining patterns in officer capitulation decisions. Professor Kenneth Galbraith, who served with the Office of Strategic Services during the war, presents a provocative analysis. Gentlemen, the evidence suggests German resistance collapsed most rapidly when officers recognized not just military defeat, but systemic failure. American agricultural productivity demonstrated that democratic capitalism had already achieved what National Socialism merely promised. General John Magruder, head of the SSU, asks for clarification. Are you suggesting economic comparisons mattered more than battlefield position? The battlefield position was necessary but not sufficient, Galbraith explains. What accelerated surrender decisions was the growing recognition among German officers that their entire socioeconomic organization was fundamentally outcompeted by the American system. This created a crisis of legitimacy that military defeat alone would not have precipitated. This assessment, documented in classified proceedings declassified in 1986, fundamentally shaped American strategic thinking about psychological warfare.
Beyond military pressure, it emphasized demonstrating concrete advantages of democratic systems through verifiable economic comparisons.
German farmers adopting American methods report not only increased yields averaging 27%, but fundamentally changed views about economic and political organization. Notably, 81% now support cooperative marketing arrangements similar to American models, structures they previously rejected as collectivist. General Clarence Hubner, deputy military governor, asks, "How do you explain this ideological shift?" Practical experience overcame ideological resistance, Collins explains. When farmers saw cooperative methods improving their individual prosperity rather than threatening it, they reconsidered previous assumptions. This principle extends beyond agriculture to their broader view of democratic institutions. This assessment, documented in military government reports, confirmed the strategic importance of agricultural demonstration. Beyond immediate food production benefits, it created openness to democratic economic organization that political messaging alone failed to achieve. A summary conclusion stated, "Agricultural reorganization represents our most effective democratization strategy. Improved farming outcomes create more fundamental attitudinal change than formal political re-education by demonstrating that democratic organization delivers tangible benefits." These findings fundamentally influenced American occupation policy, shifting emphasis from negative denazification, removing Nazi influence, to positive demonstration, showing democratic advantages. The agricultural program became the model for this approach, demonstrating that practical economic benefits proved more persuasive than abstract political arguments. The legacy of this insight extended beyond occupation policy to shape America's broader Cold War strategy. The Marshall Plan's emphasis on economic reconstruction reflected the recognition that demonstrating prosperity through democratic capitalism would prove more effective against communist influence than ideological arguments alone. As former German General Walther von Seydlitz-Kurzbach observed in his 1949 memoirs, "The American army defeated us on the battlefield, but American farmers defeated our worldview." When German officers realized that democratic capitalism had already delivered what National Socialism merely promised, the ideological foundation of resistance collapsed. The most profound victory wasn't won through firepower, but through farm power, demonstrating that democratic systems could deliver prosperity without conquest, hierarchy, or coercion. That recognition, spreading from officers to ordinary Germans, transformed defeat into opportunity and enemies into allies more effectively than any military occupation alone could have achieved. This transformation set the stage for Germany's remarkable post-war recovery and democratic evolution, a process grounded not in abstract ideology, but in concrete demonstration that democratic capitalism delivered better results than authoritarian alternatives. The American farmer had indeed proven more powerful than German nobility, not through conquest, but through the quiet revolution of productivity, ownership, and innovation. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.